Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a completely fascinating mystery about human communication in the age of AI. For decades, we've thought of machines as these cold, purely logical calculators, totally incapable of grasping the subtle, unspoken nuances of human interaction. But what if I told you that the very thing that makes our communication uniquely human is suddenly being mastered by lines of code?
So, get this. A recent study pitted large language models against 147 human subjects, and that included both native and non-native English speakers, just to see who is actually better at understanding implied meanings and navigating all those tricky conversational rules. And the results? The AI model GPT-4 absolutely crushed it. It scored a near-perfect 4.80 out of 5. To put that into perspective, the absolute highest human score on that exact same test was just 4.55.
Which brings us to a massive and honestly slightly unsettling question. Are machines actually becoming better at reading the room than we are? Have AI systems somehow unlocked the ability to understand context, sarcasm, and unspoken intentions better than the average person? Well, to figure out how an AI pulled this off, we first have to understand the specific skill it was tested on.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. What is pragmatic competence, the unspoken rules? The specific skill we're talking about here, the exact thing AI is currently beating us at, is the invisible architecture behind literally every successful conversation you've ever had.
We really need to draw a sharp line between two totally different types of language skills. On one side, we have linguistic competence. You can think of this as your vocabulary and your grammar. It's simply knowing the mechanics and rules of the language. But on the flip side is pragmatic competence. This isn't about language rules at all, it's about the rules of society. It's knowing how to act socially in any given situation, depending on exactly who you're talking to, where you are, and what your actual end goal is.
So, to define it clearly, pragmatic competence is the ability to use language effectively and appropriately across various social contexts. It dictates your tone, your level of politeness, and when you should be indirect. It's the entire reason you don't speak to your boss the exact same way you speak to your best friend, even if you're asking them both the exact same favor, right? It is, without a doubt, the real secret sauce to human connection.
Section 2. The Pragmatic Failure Trap. The Social Trap. So what actually happens when we lack this secret sauce? Well, we fall straight into a trap of awkward and sometimes seriously damaging miscommunications.
Linguist Jenny Thomas hit the nail on the head with his powerful point back in 1983. She noted that a grammatical error basically just makes you look like a beginner. If you mess up a verb tense, people easily forgive you. It's totally innocent. But a pragmatic failure? That reflects badly on you as a person. If you use the wrong tone or failed to be polite according to local customs, people don't think, oh, they're just struggling with the language. No, they think, wow, that person is incredibly rude.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. Good grammar does not equal good social skills. Research consistently shows that highly advanced language learners, people who would easily ace a written grammar test, often make just as many pragmatic errors as absolute beginners. Why? Because these two skills simply don't develop together automatically. You can have a flawlessly perfect vocabulary and still completely fail at communicating your actual intentions. Moving on to Section 3, Bridging the Cultural Gap. Lingua franca issues. Now, this distinction becomes incredibly critical when we zoom out to the global stage. English is widely used as a lingua franca, basically a bridge language between people from completely different mother tongues. But as we just learned, bridging the linguistic gap doesn't automatically bridge the cultural one.
There are a bunch of common pitfalls that lead to intercultural pragmatic failures. A huge one is inappropriate directness. For example, in one culture, giving a direct, blunt command might just be a sign of efficiency, but translate those exact same words into another culture, and it's suddenly perceived as impoliteness, a completely rude demand. These failures usually happen because we unknowingly transfer our native language norms into our second language, which just gets worse when we miss completely unrecognized cues for when it's our turn to speak or listen.
Section 4. Teaching humans to connect. Explicit instruction. Which brings us to the ultimate question. If an AI system like GPT-4 can be programmed to understand these complex rules, can we explicitly train humans to be pragmatically competent too? To find out, researchers set up a really fascinating experiment involving 10 to 12-year-old school children. Over a 6-week period, these kids weren't just given traditional vocabulary or grammar drills. Instead, they got explicit pragmatic instruction. They were systematically taught how to navigate social interactions, how to use politeness strategies, and how to actively adjust their language based on the specific context of whatever situation they were in.
And the results? They were brilliant. On the post-test, the control group, the kids who just got standard everyday language lessons, scored a 5.4 out of 10. But the experimental group, the ones explicitly taught the social rules of language, they surged to an 8.2. And this brilliantly illustrates that pragmatic competence isn't just some innate magical talent, it is a highly teachable skill. That is a massive 35% improvement.
So how exactly did they teach this in a classroom? Primarily by putting language firmly into real-world contexts. For instance, one method involved analyzing a simple bar graph about favorite activities. Instead of just mindlessly reading sentences from a textbook, the students actually had to interpret data and communicate their preferences to each other using language structures that were appropriate for that specific context.
On top of that, the students engaged in task-based role-playing exercises. They actively practiced how to compare and contrast data with their peers, but importantly, how to do it politely. By simulating these real-world scenarios, the kids really grasped the unspoken social rules of conversational turn-taking, managing a topic, and adjusting their tone to sound cooperative instead of, confrontational.
Now, you might be thinking that explicitly teaching unspoken social rules to a bunch of 10-year-olds would be incredibly dry or boring, but the survey data actually shows the exact opposite. A staggering 85% of the students found these pragmatic lessons genuinely helpful. They actually had fun learning the hidden mechanics behind how people interact.
And even more importantly, look at the impact this had on their self-esteem. 80% of the students walked away from this 6-week experiment feeling significantly more confident in their ability to navigate diverse, real-world social settings. Explicitly teaching them how to interact didn't just give them the skills, it gave them the confidence to actually go out and do it.
So, what does this all mean for us? How do we fix the education gap and build this into how we learn? Well, the research gives us a few very clear, actionable takeaways. First off, never teach a phrase without teaching its context. Second, integrate cultural knowledge directly into the learning process. Third, ditch the rigid textbooks and use authentic, real-world materials. Fourth, use task-based role-play so learners can actually practice the social dynamics. And finally, for older students, just be direct. Explicitly teach them the theories of pragmatics. Tell them exactly how politeness and directness work.
We live in an absolutely incredible era. Large language models have essentially read the entire internet, and in doing so, they've cracked the code of human pragmatics well enough to beat us at our own game. They understand our context, our politeness, and our tone. Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to reflect on. If an AI can be taught to master our deeply human, unspoken social rules, isn't it time we prioritize teaching them to each other? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it helps you navigate your next conversation with just a little more context.